the most important thing is the amazing questions we're going to answer. I really enjoyed prepping for this one because it allows me to talk about tons of things that I want. Do I want to allow this? Yes, allow. Okay, right. So, right, I have a few questions here. Okay, the first one, well, actually, the first thing I should be telling you is that the next Commit 6 intake is open. You have probably about a week to sign up because we are almost definitely going to hit the cap on our numbers, which is a genuine cap because we do one-to-one check-ins and there are only so many coaches that I have and only so much time and brain capacity that they have. And we want to go for quality over quantity. So if you are interested in signing up to Commit to 6, which is the best evidence-based coaching program if you want to lose fat and actually keep it off and move away from continuous yo-yo dieting, then head over to esgfitness.co.uk/commit. Okay, there's the ad for the start of the episode. Okay, right, question here. Could I ask your opinion on the elimination diet after an intolerance test? I did a York intolerance test on thinking it was good and trustworthy. Unfortunately not. This was followed by a quote-unquote nutritionist call. I like that she already put that in air quotations. By the way, you also get Herbalife nutritionists. So just be aware that you can literally just like call yourself a nutritionist. It's not a protected term, hence why random people on an MLM scheme can just decide that they're now nutritionists. So just be aware of that term. And anyway, was told to eliminate yeast and associated things for at least 12 weeks. She talked about leaky gut syndrome. Is this a natural thing? Okay, so there are a couple of questions here. I'm going to go through them. The short answer to this is that I would not put, I'm going to be like diplomatic here, but like too much weight on what's been said here. But like I actually would completely disregard it unless you're finding that excluding. Well, actually, no, I would completely disregard this. The reason for that is that the York test is a IgG food intolerance test. And these are widely criticized in science. And it's why that you wouldn't get one from a doctor or anyone in like the actual regulated medical community. They don't diagnose food intolerances. Unfortunately, most food intolerances, i.e. not allergies, are actually quite hard to identify, and the best way to do it, unfortunately, is quite a hard process, which is a structured elimination diet that you would do with a dietitian. Like this is not something I would do with clients. Like you need to be a trained dietitian. There's a very special protocol to go through. You're then re-adding in things to see what is and isn't causing you issues. So it's not just like you can do these random tests. Like it would be nice if you could, but at the moment you can't. What these are actually measuring is certain antibodies. And what this normally shows is quite convenient because it normally shows what you've been frequently exposed to. And then in your head, you're like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Like the only reason someone would be getting this test is normally because they're having some kind of gastrointestinal distress or pain or discomfort in some way. So then they get the test and it comes back saying, oh my God, you're intolerant to bread, or you shouldn't be eating garlic or something. But it might only be because you've been eating that food. And then you're like, oh my God, it's right. I have been eating that food and I am getting this negative symptom, which is the only reason that I took the test in the first place. It must be right. And then I'll eliminate this. The problem with that is that you're then told to eliminate this huge list of foods, which is basically just foods that you've been exposed to recently. And then you're ending up with a very over-restrictive diet that's very hard to stick to. But what you will probably find is there's a reduction in symptoms, partly because you've removed a huge part of your diet. So your whole diet has changed. You don't know what within that, if anything, has actually helped you or not. So it's not something that I would recommend people do. And I don't just mean that as like, this is my opinion on this. This is like the British Dietetics Association specifically advises against doing these tests because they don't tell you the outcome that you want. And then often what happens is you eliminate way too much food from your diet unnecessarily. Often that can cause other issues whether it's physiological or psychological, of just like, now you're scared of eating some certain foods that actually don't cause you a problem. The second part on leaky gut, this term tends to be used by like marketing type industry wellness people. Um, in medicine, it is actually a real thing, but it's very, very rare. It happens in things like inflammatory bowel disease or very severe infections or certain medical conditions, or sometimes in celiac disease as well. But the idea that like a large proportion of the population is just walking around with actually, like, I mean, leaky gut is just like a marketing type term. What can happen in those conditions that I just mentioned is increased intestinal permeability. The likelihood of that happening to you if you don't have one of those conditions is very, very low. And even if that was happening to you, then, taking a supplement or listening to a random dietitian online that's promoting the York test or something, like, is certainly not the right way to go about it. So you still want to go and see a medical professional if that is something you were genuinely worried about. But the vast majority of people, this is not a concern. It's not a worry. Um, Now, what that doesn't mean is that the symptoms that you're potentially experiencing aren't very real and don't require attention and potentially speaking to your doctor about. I think one of the things that I've found with people who struggle with some kind of IBS or like pain or discomfort is it can be really frustrating to try and figure out what that is, which is why people then take it on themselves to go online and find these kind of tests. But actually, these tests don't work and don't give you the outcome. And I can completely understand how frustrating it is when you go and see a doctor and they don't have the answer. And I get that that's, you can also get quite, frustrated, angry, disappointed with that. But the reason that they don't have the answer is because they're telling you the truth. Like, it's not that easy to diagnose. It's kind of, in some ways, as much as it's frustrating because you want to know what's wrong so that you can fix the problem, in some ways it's almost more reassuring when you go to a doctor and they're like, we actually don't know what's going on. We're going to investigate more, but we can't just give you a fix, a solution, a medicine. Whereas someone online who's just looking to market you something and sell you something is going to be like, oh my God, leaky gut, collagen. Haven't you thought of just taking collagen? That's probably going to fix it for you, or this supplement, or some kind of protocol that they have, or do my test that doesn't actually tell you what you want, what the outcome is, but then I'm going to get you to go on this really overly restrictive diet and we'll just see what happens. And in some ways it feels like you're doing something and you're like, well, at least I'm like trying to do something. So I completely understand that. I completely understand the psychology of it, but you also need to take a step back and be like, well, actually that's essentially just selling me a lie. So if I would recommend going to see a registered dietitian. If anyone is looking for a registered dietitian, I know a very good one. She's called Sophie. I can introduce you to her. It is worth paying to see an actual professional who does this for a job, who's very good at it, who's not looking to scam you, who is a medical official or whatever, like, with, I don't even know what the right word I'm trying to say is here, accredited, actually qualified, etc., etc. It would be good to see someone, and it might cost you some money, but at least once, to then like solve this problem once and for all, as opposed to trying to figure out yourself with people selling you crap online. And I think the hard part is anyone who's legit probably won't be able to give you a definitive answer straight away, which is what you're looking for. Instead, it's going to be more nuanced. There's probably going to be some testing required. There's probably going to be some kind of elimination diet required, which does require quite a lot of work, adherence. It takes a while to do this and to see what is causing the issue and what's not causing the issue. But if you do that well once, then you actually find the solution. And then hopefully for the rest of your life, you won't struggle with the same problems that you are. So if you do want that referral to Sophie, shoot me a message. I will send you her details and you can do what you want with them. She also gives out a ton of really useful free information and explains a lot of the things I've just explained in much better way because she is a professional in that area, and that is what she's been doing for many, many years. Okay, this is the part I wanted to really debunk today. So someone sent me an article. It is a Telegraph article on basically like an argument against calories. So it claims that it's not the calories that you eat, it's the calories that you store. This is the scientist who has the secret behind lasting weight loss, and it's not counting calories. Now, before I even opened this, I thought, I think I know who this is. And shockingly, I was right. It's Jason Fung, who, if anyone has been around and been debunking bullshit for long enough, will have probably heard of. He is a bit of a low carb zealot. And I thought, oh, this is quite a good article to go through because there are tons of things to debunk. I actually probably won't get through all of them, but I pulled out some of them that I think are most useful and then will stop people getting confused or kind of conned or like start to question their own understanding of things. And then you can use this in other contexts. So I think it's quite common to get to a point where you're like, okay, I finally get it. Like, it's not easy, but it is still calories in versus calories out. And then you see an article like this and you're like, oh, did I just not really understand? Is there more to it? And it's spilling this other narrative. So this article contains some quite reasonable points, but most of them are oversimplifications. Some of the claims are not supported at all by evidence. In fact, we have evidence to counter those claims. And I've pulled out some of the key ones that I think will be useful. And then I've put in like some of the science behind why this isn't true, but also why there's sometimes like a pinch of like truth in it. It's just been spun in a certain narrative. So the first claim that's made is that like eat less and move more is too simplistic. So what he's implying here is that the energy balance model is either wrong or incomplete, and that it's not calories alone that determine fat loss, or it's not energy balance alone that determines fat loss. Now, we have a ton of data to show that energy balance is the fundamental driver of body weight change. If there is a mismatch between energy balance, i.e., you are taking in more energy for a period of time or you are expending more energy for a period of time, you will either gain weight or lose weight, depending on what direction that is in. This is supported by decades of metabolic ward studies. And what's important about these is that in a metabolic ward, you are not just observing what people do in free living conditions, which has, we know that people eat for various reasons. We know that people are not very good at tracking calories. And we know that some people respond stronger to a calorie deficit by reducing their energy expenditure. So it can seem often like they're trying to stick to a deficit, but not actually sticking to a deficit and thus not losing weight, but they feel like they are, and maybe there's something else going on. Whereas when you look at metabolic ward studies, they're a really important part of research in nutrition because they tightly control what participants eat and then how their body responds. So you have participants living in a clinical trial research facility that is heavily controlled. So you know exactly what people are eating, how many calories they consume, how many calories they burn during the day, but very accurate measures of this, not just like, oh, they're wearing a Fitbit and they're going to track calories on MyFitnessPal. Like, that is not actually a very controlled experiment. So in these experiments, the food is literally provided by the researchers, right? Movement is monitored and you can measure metabolic rate. So it's very, very controlled, which allows us to kind of bypass a lot of the longer term nutritional studies, which are done on like self-reported food intake, which is notoriously not particularly accurate. And then you can look at the impacts of things like diet composition, whether a low carb diet is better than a low fat diet, and what the physiological impacts of that are, which actually will bring us on to another claim that is made later on about low carb diets and insulin being an important driver to fat storage and keeping insulin low being important to losing fat, which I think I debunked probably numerous times, but is not the case. So there are tons of metabolic ward studies now that show that it is energy balance that is causing fat loss. When calories are reduced, people lose weight, regardless of the diet composition, right? So whether it's low carb or low fat, it was Kevin Hall that did one of the most, or one of the kind of landmark studies around this, and found that it was calorie intake that determined weight loss, not insulin levels or macronutrient type. So that kind of debunks that one. Now, I think what's interesting here is that there is I to give credit to each of these points, and this is what I'm going to try and do, is I kind of argue them both ways. Calories matter most when it comes to what's going to make you lose fat. But things like hormones influence your hunger, your satiety, your behavior, your mood, potentially symptoms, depending on exactly what we're talking about here, which do affect the calories that you consume. But that's because they're impacting things. It doesn't dispute energy balance. It's because they're impacting your behaviors and thus potentially how much you eat or how much you move and how much you expend. So when he says eat less, move more is too simplistic, it's not from a physiological perspective of what's going on, but it kind of is from a behavioral perspective. Now, this isn't his argument, right? His argument is there is physiologically something different and it's about insulin and you need to go low carb. But if we're taking that claim, I'm I agree with it, just not for the reasons that you've stated. It is really hard, right? And I don't think that advice on its own is particularly useful from a behavioral standpoint, because it's really hard in the environment that we live in to maintain a consistent calorie deficit long enough to lose the fat that many people need to lose, or even then for the rest of your life, which is part that people don't really talk about. That fat loss is so hard. It's do you know what's harder than fat loss? Maintenance, maintaining it long term for the rest of your life. Being able to maintain a healthy weight in the environment that we live in, with the stresses that we have, with the food availability that's there, with with the environment that we live in, it's actually quite hard to be as active as we should be. That's a really hard thing to do, right? And if you just go with the flow, then you will end up overweight, which is why the average person is overweight, right? Our drive to eat is really strong. That's our evolutionary drive to eat. And that was protective at times when actually the biggest threat we had was to starve. But now that it's much more likely that we're going to overeat and have complications of obesity, that's not a particularly useful drive anymore. And actually it becomes a bit of a problem, right? So this is why it's easy to convince people that there is more to it, right? That there must be something else, that maybe it's insulin, because it sounds so simple. It's then hard to comprehend how hard it is to action. And it really, once you point that out, I think people kind of it's a bit of a clicking point of it is really simple. You need to eat less and move more. But doing that is really hard. It's a really hard thing to do. That doesn't mean that it's more complicated than that. It just means that it's hard. So then the real question is, how do we get people to stick to that long term? How do we get people to be able to create a calorie deficit and maintain it long term until they've lost the fat that they want to lose, and then maintain living at maintenance calories and not falling back into going into a surplus and yo-yo dieting again long term? And I think some people expect that at maintenance, they won't be hungry anymore, or they won't have cravings anymore, or that it'll be easier than the fat loss phase. It's actually not really. The difference between someone's sensible fat loss diet and maintenance isn't huge. You are still going to have to put conscious effort in. You're still going to have to think, oh, if I want to maintain this body that I've achieved through diet and exercise, I'm going to have to keep basically doing a very similar diet, just a couple of hundred or maybe slightly more depending on the size of your deficit. But for a lot of women, it's only a couple of hundred more calories. And then make sure that I'm still exercising, I'm still moving just as much. These behaviors will have to maintain if you want to maintain the physique that you have achieved. And this is where Commit to 6 comes in. Now, I'm half joking, but that was an easy little pitch for you. It's the importance of considering real world behavior change, food quality, getting in enough protein, because that is what is going to allow you to eat in a way that allows you to maintain a healthy body weight. And these are things that we do cover on Commit to 6, and the mindset prep part alone will blow your mind. Because I think there are certain elements that people kind of assume, right? They're oh, I'm going to have to consider my diet. I'm going to have to consider protein intake. Maybe if they think a little bit further, they're sleep's important. I get that now. Sleep's important because that's going to allow me to be more active, to recover better, to manage my hunger better, right? Stress management is important for the same reasons because of the impact it has on my behaviors. But actually, something that's underrated is your mindset. And within that, the beliefs that you have around dieting, how you perceive the actions that you have to take. If you're seeing them as something that you have to do and you're a bit like, woe is me, I need to go to the gym, or I'm forcing myself to do that, or I can't have that because I'm need to stay at these calories, or I can't do that. Instead of framing it as like, these are things that I get to do because it's the ultimate form of self-care, is to look after my body. It's the one body I'm never going to get. And actually, when I do this and I do it in the right way, with the right mindset and the right approach and the right calories for me and the right food choices. And by the way, what you eat is so important to how much you eat, which I will come on to. That has that's going to make me feel my best, and that's something that I deserve, and that's how I want to live my life. That feels very, very different than like, oh, I'm forcing myself to go out for a walk. It's like, I get to go out for a walk because I want to, because it makes me feel good, because I'm moving my body is good, because I know it's healthy for me. And you see it as a positive thing you get to do versus something that you have to do. Okay, mad that I've been ranting that long and only just got through one claim. So let me get to, I'm just going to pull up the article. The next claim. Okay, this is a good one because it comes up in many respects. So you can use this knowledge and apply it elsewhere. And it is that dieting lowers metabolism, so weight loss stops. What he's implying here is that calorie restriction causes such a large metabolic downregulation that weight loss becomes impossible. And I think this was like a pet hate of mine when people say this, because it's so unbelievably demotivating. Like if someone's like to you, especially a doctor, like Dr. Jason Fung is like, there's no point in dieting because what's going to happen is your metabolism will slow down and then you'll stop losing weight anyway. Well, you'd be like, well, like, what's the point then? Like, what, I'm stuck. What am I going to do if that's the case? And the annoying part is like, there is an element of truth here, right? So some metabolic adaptation does occur, but it is much smaller than what is often, I was going to say claimed here, but it doesn't actually claim a specific amount. It's just insinuated that it's going to be to the extent that a sensible deficit would no longer be a deficit, which is not true. What's really, really important is that is a much smaller metabolic adaptation, right? So typically reductions in metabolic rate during weight loss tend to be around 5 to 15%. By the way, that is directly attributable to how much weight you lose. So if you're someone who's starting at, I don't know, 100 kilograms and you're going down to 60 kilograms, you are going to have a significantly bigger drop in your basal metabolic rate because you have lost more mass than someone who's going from 70 kilograms to 60 kilograms. It just makes sense, right? It is an inevitable, unavoidable part of successful fat loss, because when you have more mass, when you are a bigger person, you require more calories to maintain your weight. That makes sense, right? That's just the way that things are going to work. So if you want to lose a significant amount of weight, there will be some metabolic adaptation. That's not actually a bad thing. It's just a smaller person requires less calories. And that's been shown numerous times in studies as well. But I think if you just read that headline, it can be really demotivating. Now, the reason that this sticks around is, again, because people kind of experience some kind of plateau, which is actually usually because of misaccurate tracking or portion sizes creeping up or a bit of kind of dieting fatigue. And I don't mean to the extent that, like, I think some people see dieting fatigue as like meaning that they need like a diet break or something. It's just more that everything starts to creep back towards what you were doing before. So you start a diet, you're really accurate with everything, you're hitting your 10,000 steps, you're going to the gym all the time, and then like life gets in the way, it's not big and shiny and new, and you stopped weighing out things, so you're just guesstimating things, and actually portion sizes have kind of creeped up a bit, and you forget to track your coffee, and you're going out for drinks now and again, you might track one of them but not the second one, and you only had half of it. Anyway, point being, all these little inaccuracies start to creep in, and then what you thought was a deficit is no longer a deficit. So usually that's what's happening. And it's not that your metabolism has slowed down, although it might feel like that because you feel like you're doing the same or very similar. But usually it's this kind of like behavior creep, which is very, very normal. The best strategy I have to combat this is something I call reset weeks. I've done an article on this. Shock. Probably done an article on everything at this point. But if you would like it, and you feel like maybe that's you, like if you're someone who's been dieting for a while and you've kind of hit this plateau and you can't really figure out why you're not losing weight, do a reset week. It works. I was going to say every time. It works 99 times out of 100. It just essentially being strict for a week, but I have a certain protocol of how to do that. So if you do want that, message me and I will send it to you. My leg has just gone numb for no reason whatsoever, so that's exciting. Okay, we'll do one more claim. I could go through quite a few here. Okay, let's do this one. This is quite a long one anyway. Okay, some calories are fattening and others are not. So basically the claim here is that there are certain foods that inherently cause fat gain independently of calories. Now, surprisingly, I actually agree with this, just not in the way that he's suggesting it. So calories are not all equal when it comes to satiety and adherence. They are all equal when it comes to energy balance. And I'm actually going to argue against that point later on because there is a caveat to this, which is caloric availability of food, which he doesn't actually talk about. But I'm going to give him even more credit and explain that because it might come up if you're ever talking to someone about tracking calories and they're like, oh, there's no point tracking calories because what you eat isn't necessarily what you absorb. And they're not completely wrong, but they are largely wrong in terms of there being no point in tracking calories. And again, the magnitude of effect there is small, but it's important to understand so that you can debunk these things or explain these things, or basically so that you can fully understand these things. So for now, let's do a comparison between, say, for example, 100 calories worth of carrots and 100 calories worth of Oreos. These foods would, let's argue, although we're going to argue against this, but let's argue that they're the same calories that you're consuming. However, they differ massively in how they impact your hunger and your satiety and the likelihood of you then overeating afterwards, right? So if you can imagine a whole pile of carrots that would be 100 calories versus, I don't actually know how many calories in an Oreo. I don't know, maybe you get like a couple of Oreos, but like even if you just look at the food volume, like, okay, well, even from one element, how much is that going to stretch my stomach? Not very much in the Oreos versus the mountain of carrots that I could consume for 100 calories. Then you've got to think of other elements within food. I mean, maybe carrots wasn't like the best example because protein is very satiating as well. If you eat a higher protein, higher fiber, whole food based diet, you will spontaneously eat less calories. When you compare that to, there's one really interesting study, again by Kevin Hall, and he showed that if people eat ad lib, so you can eat as much as you want, but one group is given ultra processed foods to eat as much as they want, and one group is given only whole foods to eat as much as they want. The group who eat whole foods just spontaneously eat 500 calories less than the group that eat ultra processed foods. Not overly surprising, and it's not the food that is magically causing you to gain weight. It's that they are higher calories within those foods for the same given volume. So people end up eating more of them. And because they're not particularly satiating and often leave you wanting even more of the food, then you end up eating more. And that's why you end up gaining weight. Not because the food is inherently bad. It's like the subsequent behaviors after that food. So as like a real world application, if you are someone who is trying to lose body fat or even just to maintain a healthy body fat in the environment that we live in, then making sure that your diet includes high enough protein, high fiber, minimally processed foods, like minimal amount of bulk processed foods. I wouldn't go to the extreme of being so dichotomous about excluding every single ultra processed food, and that it ends up becoming quite toxic. And now I've forgotten the word for there's like an eating disorder that's like all about eating clean foods. Now I can't remember it. I can see the word in my head. Oh, it's gone. I'm pretty sure there's an O at the start of it. No, sorry. And also, I know this is really annoying because whenever I hear someone do something like this on a podcast, and like there'll be people like, "Oh my god, it's this," obviously, and then I'm like, "Yeah, sorry." Anyway, I can't remember the word, but basically, it becomes quite a negative thing, or can like impact your relationship with food. And then what I wanted to discuss just briefly is caloric availability. So I'm probably giving this guy more credit than he should have, but it's another interesting point to discuss because the caloric availability of food refers to the fact that you don't actually absorb all of the calories in a food. And if we go back to the carrots versus the Oreos, because carrots have more fiber in, you're going to absorb less of the 100 calories of carrot than you are of the 100 calories of Oreo, which is actually very efficient for the body to take in. So it can take in significantly more of the Oreo. Whereas if there is a lot of fiber in something, there's quite a strong plant cell structure that's hard for the body to break down. So it can't actually break down all of it, right? Crude example of this, but one that you'll probably resonate with and then remember is that sometimes you will see sweet corn come out very similar to what it looked like going in, right? So it's obviously not been fully digested. And this is because the way that we measure calories is in like the calories in a food, the way that we figure out how much is in something is in something called a bomb calorimeter, where they actually burn a food to a crisp and they see how much heat is produced from that food. Now, your body is not that efficient, so it won't actually be able to break down all of the food. So there's some calories that do like pass through you and are not absorbed. So there's that element. On top of that, there's also the thermic effect of food. So if you eat higher protein food, and higher fiber food, you require more calories to actually break down that food. So you're going to absorb less of 100 calories of chicken than you are of 100 calories of Oreo, for example, because of the thermic effect of food. But what most people miss here is the magnitude of effect. And that is, again, smaller than what most people try and, I guess, like state in headlines or on social media just to kind of dramatize things. So whole foods, if you do eat mostly whole foods, then you will have a slightly lower caloric availability of food. So you'll absorb less calories overall. But the effect of that is actually quite small. Like it's never going to be more than about 10% of the calories that you consume. So the main thing to be thinking about, and the main reason that whole foods actually result in less calorie intake and usually better fat loss, is because they are more satiating. They have a big impact on hunger and appetite control. They are higher in food volume, which means that people end up eating less calories overall, and thus they get better fat loss results. If you do want an evidence-based guide to how to manage your hunger and like the best foods to eat and the best properties of food, it's less about like here's a specific diet to stick to and more about like use these, I think there's 8 or 9 principles that are all very evidence-based that will make food, the diet that you consume, essentially more satiating. So if you do want that guide, shoot me the word hunger and I will send you it, because again, I have an article on that, which is one of the most popular articles I've written. And finally, remember to get signed up to Commit 6 if you are looking for the best evidence-based coaching program. And if you do have any questions on that, you can head over to the website, have a little look, esgfitness.co.uk/commit. And if you want to talk to me, there is a button there and you can click it and then you can just WhatsApp me any questions that you have. It's amazing. Orthorexia, that's what it was. Catherine absolutely nailed it. Okay, well, there we go. That's what I was talking about with avoiding, like specifically trying to avoid all ultra processed foods. Okay, I hope that has been useful. I will maybe debunk the rest of those next week, because it was quite nice to take a little break from supplements. But again, I will probably be back with some supplements next week. And I hope that's been useful. Have amazing evenings.